Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on this beautiful day. My name is Kelly Ann Boyce, and I proudly serve as president of the Chautauqua Women's Club. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's very nice. Welcome to our Contemporary Issues Forum, or CIF for short. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the hardworking people who make this afternoon possible. You can wait until the end after I mention sponsors, because there's a lot to thank, so then we'll clap. Thank you to Jake, who faithfully records each lecture. Deb Treffs for another wonderful article in today's Chautauquan Daily. Hopefully you all got a chance to read it. Jean, our usher, and CWC's Hope and Ruth Ann at our welcome table. We are incredibly grateful to our 2026 CIF sponsors, our wonderful anonymous donor, Chrissy Fulton and George Fector, Lauren Rich Fine of Beatrice Advisors, Susan O'Connor Baird, McGee Women's Research Institute, and Kathy Bonner, Mary Lou Goodman, and Josette Raleigh in loving memory of Rita Auerbach. Now we can clap. Thank you. There might be one or two other possibilities to clap here. So, for 137 years, the Women's Club has brought people together through curiosity, learning, friendship, and community. Today, we have more than 900 members from across the United States, including over 100 men. And I always like to share that fun fact with people because they're like, "You have men?" Yes, and we love them. This summer, we celebrated one of our proudest milestones in our history. The Women's Club has now provided more than $2 million in scholarships for students in Chautauqua's schools of performing and visual arts over the last 42 consecutive years. So that deserves clapping. We are incredibly proud of that legacy and grateful to all of you who help us carry it forward. To learn about membership in our year-round Chautauqua Academy programs, please either stop at the welcome table or visit chautauquawomensclub.org. Now on to our today's speaker. I am especially happy today about today's program because we have a speaker who's not only someone's work I admire, but someone I'm fortunate to call a friend. Dr. Jonathan Deutsch and his wonderful wife, Molly, are friends from Philadelphia. And when I saw this week's theme, Chautauqua's future of food, climate, technology, and the next agricultural revolution, I knew Jonathan belonged in this conversation because his perspective is a little different. We'll hear from a great deal from people this week and experts about climate, agriculture, science, technology, and sustainability. Jonathan brings another important voice to the table, the chef. And I love the simple idea at the heart of so much of his work. We can create food that's healthier, more sustainable, and technologically brilliant. But if people don't want to eat it, we haven't solved the problem. Jonathan is a classically trained chef, scholar, researcher, and innovator. He is professor and co-chair of health sciences at Drexel University and a founding director of the Drexel Food Lab, where chefs work alongside scientists, physicians, dietitians to solve real-world problems involving food, health, and sustainability. He was also the inaugural James Beard Foundation Impact Fellow that has led national efforts to reduce waste and has written or edited 8 books. What I find so interesting about Jonathan is the way he connects all those worlds together, the science, the systems, and the economics, without ever forgetting the kitchen. And when he isn't thinking about food, he plays the tuba. That's my favorite line in your biography. Before I welcome Jonathan, just a quick reminder, next Saturday, August 22nd, is sadly our final CIF of the season. We will welcome Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Heather Ann Thompson to discuss her new book, Fear and Fury, The Reagan 80s and the Bernie Goetz Shootings, and the Rebirth of White Rage. It promises to be a fascinating and powerful way to close our CIF season, and I hope you will all join us. Today's lecture will last approximately 35-40 minutes, followed by about 15 minutes of questions. There are microphones at either side. Please keep your questions concise, no Chautauqua preludes, and if you don't want to be recorded, please refrain from asking a question and speak directly into the microphone so everybody can hear, and those out on the Grove, thank you for coming on your lawn chairs. So John, we are delighted that you and Molly are here with us, and I am certain this will not be your last visit to Chautauqua. So everyone, please join me in giving a warm Chautauqua welcome to Dr. Jonathan Deutsch. Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you, Kelly, for that lovely introduction, and thanks to you and Hope and all the members of the Women's Club and sponsors and supporters for inviting me. It's a great honor. I was here once before as a child, maybe 9 or 10, and had a few moments of deja vu because things have not changed as much as you might think in the last 40 years, which is kind of a wonderful thing. So I have special permission from Kelly for this introduction because I was asked a few times how we met and how we connected and how I came to be here. So I thought I would tell this story. I have a little side hustle, which I call a jobby, of doing restaurant reviewing in our empty nest era. And I was at a local steakhouse, sitting at the bar, and trying a few dishes for a potential review. And Kelly sat down next to me and ordered a tuna tartare and had a few bites and said, "I'm not going to finish this. Would you care to finish this? I didn't touch this half." She was very conscientious. And I said, "I work in food waste, and I feel especially obligated to finish it." And then I also whispered, because I'm anonymous, that as a restaurant reviewer, one of the challenges is you can't just go in alone and have a couple bites and say, it wasn't that good. You have to give them the benefit of the doubt. The more things you can try, the better. So I was glad to have had 2 meals. And that tradition continued last night when I finished Kelly's pork chop. So it's been a great relationship ever since. And I don't know much about Chautauqua history, but I suspect if I'm not the only, then I might be one of the few Women's Club speakers who's been picked up at a bar by the president of the Women's Club in this 137-year history. So if that's true, I'm going to make a plaque for myself or something. So thank you. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and I think that kind of informs the orientation, and then we'll get into some storytelling. I professionally have a background as a research chef, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that is in a minute. I started cooking really around the time I visited Chautauqua. I always say I have 2 types of students in culinary. There's one flavor of student who grew up at someone's apron strings, and all of their fond memories are, taking that wooden spoon of sauce and tasting what their mom or their grandmother made, and that inspires them to get into culinary. And then there were kids like me who were fat kids who liked to eat and parents who worked, and you figure, all right, if you're not going to cook the kinds of food I want after a long day of work, I'll figure it out, and it became a win-win. So I would make some ridiculous dinner on a weeknight, some sort of failed Wellington, and my parents were thrilled because they didn't have to cook, and I was thrilled because I got to eat. And that prepared me well for my career as a fat adult who likes to eat, so it all works out. So I started cooking professionally when I was 14. I was a counselor in training at a Boy Scout camp, and I quickly learned that I could volunteer in the kitchen where there's always need for more help, and it was appreciated, and I could eat whatever I wanted, or I could be out in the woods camping, eating ground beef in foil packets that are cooked in the coals with potatoes cooked in the coals, and it didn't sound very appealing to me. So I've been cooking ever since. I went to culinary school at the Culinary Institute of America. My parents insisted that if I do that, I had to get a real college degree. So I got a real college degree at Drexel, where I teach now, for the reason that Drexel is the only Carnegie R1 research university with a culinary program, which I'll get back to later. So I thought, all right, well, you may make me go to college, but I'm not going to learn anything new. I'm going to stay in culinary, hospitality, food science, this area. So it's been really great. I've worked in restaurants, hotels, catering. Molly and I met working in a restaurant together, which is one of the cook and server romance is quite a trope in the restaurant industry. But I sort of ended my industry career before moving into education, working with food companies as a research chef. Research chefs work at the intersection of culinary arts and food science. And most people don't know, everyone knows what a chef is in a restaurant or a hotel, catering, and so on. Most people don't know what research chefs are, but I would say, even though we don't know each other, most of us, you have probably eaten my food, which is an interesting way to look at things, right? If you haven't been here, you probably haven't eaten the food of the chef here, right? But you probably have eaten my food because we've developed products for mass market for Nestle and Unilever and Hershey and companies like that. So every product at the supermarket, even most products at restaurants, you know, if you get a turkey sandwich, it's in all likelihood, they're not baking the bread and roasting the turkey and making the mayonnaise from eggs and oil, right? They're opening containers, and all of those things have been made by research chefs. And I found it a very rewarding career in a lot of ways, but also a very fraught career, which I'll talk about. I was sitting at a dinner of our advisory board next to the chief medical officer of PepsiCo. And most people are surprised that there is a chief medical officer at PepsiCo, but there is. His lovely guy's name's Antonio Tarantini. He's Italian. And he told me, you know, it's all well and good to teach people how to eat healthier, greens and grains and plant-based, and that's wonderful, it's noble, it's important. He said, my company, which is PepsiCo, does 1.25 billion sales daily. They sell 1.25 billion food products daily, globally. So while that is important, he also feels it's important to incrementally change those 1.25 billion products. And if you can make everything 5% better, 10% better, the scope and scale of the potential is just like unbelievable to get your head around. So that's what a research chef is. Okay, so that's my background. I'm going to talk a bit about Drexel, where I teach, and it's a very interesting place, and I think it's a little symbiotic in its origin with Chautauqua. It's a golden age homage to learning, and also integrating. So the logo for Drexel is a triangle, and our newspaper is still called a triangle, and it says art, science, and industry, and all of these things connect and intersect, and that was the vision from the founding. Drexel's in Philadelphia in the shadow of another university in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania, founded by a guy named Ben Franklin, and about 100 years before Drexel. And A.J. Drexel was, he was one of the partners of J.P. Morgan. And so he had, I would say, a businessman's swagger when he started this in next door to Penn, and said, okay, well, we're going to do some things differently here. And really, there were a number of universities at this time started by industrialists, Carnegie Mellon, Stetson, University of Chicago. And a lot of the focus was, well, there's nothing wrong with Penn. They do a great job. And if we need classicists and if we need reverends and so on, we can get them from there. But we have factories, and we need engineers, and we need chemists. And so there were a few interesting things about the founding of Drexel that have stayed true until now. One is that it was from its inception a co-ed university, which was very progressive in 1891. They had 4 original majors, gets a little less progressive here, 2 majors for men and 2 majors for women. The men's majors were commerce, which is now reflected in our School of Business, and chemistry. And a lot of that, which I'll get to in a second, was actually food chemistry and other industrial chemistry. And then there were 2 majors for women, millinery, hat making, and home economics. And home economics is really the great-great-grandmother of our current focus in food, nutrition, fashion, interiors, and so on. A lot of those great programs came out of that home economics program. So at the same time Drexel started with these majors like home economics and chemistry, the industrial food system really started concurrent with that. So Campbell's started in the 1870s. Campbell's soups was invented, the condensed soup, which was a huge innovation at the time, was invented in 1897. Hershey started in 1894. So a lot of our students really grew up with this industrial food boom, which was not so different from, the auto boom in the 50s, the PC boom in the 80s, the internet boom in the 90s. Now might be space, privatization of space, or AI. This really different way of doing things, right? There were problems that hadn't been solved on the industrial scale. So I was recruited to Drexel in 2012, and the provost at the time was my professor when I was an undergrad in the 90s. And he reached out and he said, we have this legacy of home economics and culinary going back to 1891. I hate to lose that, but we're a Carnegie R1 research university with a culinary program. And if you think about it, most culinary schools, which are wonderful, you have schools like CIA and Johnson & Wales and many community college programs, which are great places to learn to cook, but they're not, doctoral granting research universities. They're not at that sort of academia kind of level. They're more practical. And then in academia, you have great programs like Cornell Hotel School, you have Penn State, Rutgers Food Science, and they do a great job, but they're not teaching cooking, right? They're teaching hospitality management, nutrition, food science, and so on. And there's this interesting opportunity. So he said to me, the big question we're having in the provost's office is, do we let the culinary schools sort of do their thing, and do we close culinary at Drexel and, tell people they can go to CIA or Johnson & Wales or community college? Or as a Carnegie R1 doctoral granting research university, is there such a thing as culinary research? And he said, I see on your LinkedIn that you're a research chef. And he said, I don't know what that is, and I don't really care what that is, but if you think there's an opportunity to do a research-focused culinary program at our university, I would like to hear about it. And I said, yes, I think there is, and I wrote a little 2-page memo, and I submitted it, and he said thank you, and 6 months later, I got an email that said, well, we drafted a position based on your 2-pager, so you might want to apply for it. And I did. So here I am now, 13 years later, running this thing that we call the Drexel Food Lab. So the Drexel Food Lab came out of this paper, and it's really a product development and food innovation lab. And we're focused on using culinary techniques, cooking, In culinary, we like to make things sound fancier than they are, but cooking to improve the health of people, planet, and economies. And I'll give you some examples around there. And the idea basically is that our food system is really troubled in a lot of ways. You may have heard of something called cyclospora in the past few weeks, which now has 14,000 cases. It is a symptom of our current conglomeration of the food system that one farm making one mistake in another country could sicken 14,000 people in multiple states, right, across our country. Like, God forbid there was a problem, in your home or in a local restaurant that's sourced locally. That would be terrible, but it might affect tens of people, right? Because tens of people would go to this restaurant and they would feel sick the next day and they would call the restaurant and the health department would shut it down and it would be over, right? But the traceability and the complexity and the consolidation of things makes it really tough. So there's issues like that, food safety, traceability. There's issues like obesity, which I think is fascinating. We're all here because our ancestors had very good, slow metabolisms, right? So most people, if you think back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, you will hit the point where someone in your family experienced food insecurity and hunger, right? So, for me, it's my grandfather, so 2 generations back. Some people are more fortunate, it might be hundreds of years back. But our ancestors were very good at surviving on relatively little, right? And that's why we're all here. It's survival of the fittest, right? And those who were not as good might have died from starvation or malnutrition. So now, right around that time Drexel was founded, from the early 1900s and really post-World War II until present, we've had a problem that has never been a problem in all of human history, which is, what do we do with all this food, right? Our entire evolution has been focused on getting enough food and surviving through harsh winters and times of famine and times of scarcity. And now we're looking back and we're saying, I need help navigating the supermarket. There's all this delicious food that's very affordable, even if we complain about prices going up. We've never paid less as a percentage of our income for food than we do now, right? And so our whole world is turned upside down in the last 100 years in the food system. So our original idea with the Drexel Food Lab was to use a Robin Hood model where we would charge the food industry to do things like new flavors of chips and soda and ultra-processed food, and we would take that revenue and we would use that to solve food system problems. And we quickly learned that that was a terrible model, that the food industry didn't need our help doing what they're already doing, but they did need help doing the kinds of things we were interested in doing. So we came up with a new model, and where our students are solving real-world problems in the food industry, in the food system through culinary arts. And we get that support, it's about a third. So we're about 1/3 philanthropically supported, which we're very grateful for, and that allows us for capacity building, for doing things like this. About 1/3 grant funded, which really pays for the time of our main staff, and about 1/3 contracts with industry to help them solve problems. And that may be a startup saying, I want to really get a new product to market, all the way through an existing food company who may say, I'm looking for new products in the future. And I always emphasize that while we do this work in food product development, what we're really doing is producing new talent. So when I was a culinary student and I said, I have interest in sustainability and the food system and all this kind of stuff, my chefs said, well, that's great, but what you really need to do is focus on being a good cook. And then if you're successful, let's say you own a few restaurants, you hit your 50s, you can start a foundation or give back in some way and take an interest in it then. So our whole model is really flipping that to say, well, what if we could start with the food system challenges and opportunities, concurrently teach the technical skills, and then give those students in their 20s, 30s, 40s, their most productive decades in their career, the ability to not only have the technical skills to solve these problems, but also the critical skills to solve these problems. So that's a long intro, but it sets you up for 3 fun stories. So I'm going to tell you 3 stories on that people, planet, economies. One is called the banana story. One is called the Fiona story. And one is called the ice cream story. And I'll get through them all. I have other stories in the chamber, so if the Q&A goes slow, which I don't think it will, I'll tell you more stories. But the common thread of all these stories is a food system problem that was really inadequately solved because the chefs were not at the table. And then our students and staff really solved the problem. So I'm going to start with the banana story. So in 2015, over a decade ago, we were invited by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Administration, to participate in a program they were calling the Food Recovery Challenge. And some people, if you're a DC policy nerd, you might think, well, why does the EPA care about food? That's USDA. But the EPA cares about food because the largest component of our solid waste stream is organic matter like food and leaves that could be used for other purposes, even biofuels, right? So about 1/3 of food in our food system is produced but never eaten. And if you know anything about food, you know that the agriculture and food industry is our largest consumer of fossil fuels and clean water and land. So we have a whole industry that's a very resource-intensive industry making 133% of what it needs. And that extra, that 33% extra, is contributing to about 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. The producing of the food, the storing of it, the distribution of it, and then its decay. At the same time we have all this extra food, about 1 in 8 Americans are experiencing food insecurity. And in Philadelphia, it was 1 in 4. So from an ethical standpoint, to me, it's absolutely unconscionable that anyone is hungry in this country because we have too much food, right? We have a problem with too much food, so much that we don't know what to do with it. And at the same time, there are people who need it who aren't getting it. So we were asked by the EPA to participate in this food recovery challenge. And the idea was that any excess food that we generated as a culinary school could go to people who need it in the community. And it turned out that we were a very bad candidate to participate in this program because college students are also experiencing food insecurity and will take anything home. So we had very little waste in our program, but we participated in this program. And we went to a local supermarket, and this supermarket worked with the University of Pennsylvania urban planning program to put a system in place to donate their surplus food before it went to compost. So prior to this program, the supermarket had a composting program where they would take all their surplus food and send it to a biodigester, which would actually make energy to power the warehouse. So really good program. It cost the supermarket about $3,000 a week to send that compost there. So the Penn students came in and they said, we have a solution to this, we're going to solve this problem. And what they did was they established sort of a triage period. So every morning in the supermarket, each department head and their staff go through the department and pull anything that's going to reach its sell-by date, or it's too old, or it's not cosmetically, it doesn't look good. And typically that gets composted. Well, in this case, they said, we're going to create a window from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Anyone could drive up. If you're from a soup kitchen, a food pantry, a nonprofit, you could drive up to our loading dock and take anything that's going to be thrown out before it gets thrown out so that we could feed the neighborhood. Really wonderful program. And it was very successful in terms of moving thousands of pounds of food. And our students worked with one of these sites, Shelter for Women and Children, to help them recover this surplus food. It was a really wonderful program. So our culinary students volunteered, and we met at the supermarket, and the chef, who used to be a former fine dining chef and just kind of got sick of the rat race and decided, okay, I want to help real people, cook for real people. Drove up and in her station wagon we put bananas, strawberries, lettuce, tomatoes, giant sheet cake, all sorts of stuff that was going to be thrown out. And then she supplemented that meal with things from her inventory, which she had about $600 a month of a budget to feed 50 women and children outside of the donation. So she could buy some chicken, some rice, some oil, things like that, but really, really paltry budget. And then we went back to the soup kitchen and we combined her inventory with the donations. We made a beautiful lunch, chicken, rice, salad, cake. And at the end of the buffet, we took this case of bananas, and these were kind of like speckled, spotty, not brown, but sort of turning. You know, most of us, when we buy bananas in the store, it's the green or greenish, and we give it a few days. So these were culled from the supermarket that morning. And she took that whole case of bananas, there's about 60 in the case, and she put them in this giant stainless steel bowl. And this was women and children, teenagers. They would go through the line, chicken, rice, salad, cake. So of the 50 women and children in this shelter, how many of them do you think took a banana when they got to the end of this buffet? Any guess? 4. Who said 4? Did you hear this before? You nailed it. 4. 4 bananas were taken. And at the end of the lunch, the chef, packs up the rice and chicken in case people want leftovers or they missed lunch. She leaves out some cake for snacking. That was all gone. She left a few bananas around as well for snacking. And then she took this giant stainless steel bowl of bananas, and what do you think she did with it? She went right to the trash and threw that out. And then the next day, she went back to the supermarket and got another case of bananas, because every day there's more waste, right? So on the supermarket website, there's a picture of the CEO, who later ran for mayor, shaking hands with someone in the community, talking about the tens of thousands of pounds of food that they donate, which is wonderful, right? Not to take anything away from that. But the supermarket has this state-of-the-art biodigester running the warehouse, right? And the money to send it there. And the shelter has to pay $200 every time their trash is picked up, and a dumpster full of food that would have been composted, right? So it was a really broken system. So our students looked at this, and they said, we can fix this. We can make something that will use up all of these bananas and help people get more nutrition. So what do you think they made? Banana bread? No, terrible. Do you have a thick skin? Banana bread, folks? So why is banana bread a terrible answer? Let's talk about that. So there's a lot of sugar, right? They're already getting cakes, right? And anyone who's worked in a soup kitchen or pantry, sweet baked goods, they're like, no more, please, right? There's always a ton of cakes and cookies and pies because they're made daily, right? Has anyone made banana bread lately? How many bananas in a loaf? 3. How many? So there's 60 bananas in a case. You can make about 20 loaves for 50 people, right? It's not very efficient, right? And then there's cost, right? You have to buy the eggs and the oil and the flour, right? I think banana bread needs to have dark chocolate and dark rum. Those are very expensive ingredients, right? So yes. Yeah, exactly. So they made something that was a lot simpler. If you freeze bananas, you cut them in 1-inch chunks. You can even use the peel, but I don't recommend it. But it's a good source of fiber. Freeze it and puree it, mash it. You get something that, in quotes, I would call banana ice cream, right? It's not amazing, but it gets the job done, right? And it's one ingredient, bananas. And all of us in here, probably, without knowing anything about you, I am guessing that all of us need more fruits and vegetables in our diets. And I will guarantee that the people living in a shelter, which includes pregnant women, moms, nursing moms, infants, children, and teens, all need more fruits and vegetables in their diet, right? So just with this simple technique, right, instead of saying, here's a spotty banana, do you want it or not? Changing to this model, what percentage of bananas do you think were eaten when they took that daily donated case? 100. Every day, no more bananas, right? So the only waste was the peels. So again, culinary interventions to solve simple problems. This is not high tech, right? This is about as low tech and innovation as you can come up with. The Penn students were using GIS and mapping and figuring out where the food was going. That's wonderful, good for them. But they forgot about the fact that they're just moving pounds of food around. If it's, as Kelly said in the introduction, if it's not delicious, no one's gonna eat it. Okay, so that's story number 1. Story number 2 is about Fiona. Fiona is the daughter of a friend of mine. At the time we did this work, she was 4 years old, and she's on the autism spectrum, was nonverbal. And like a lot of kids on the autism spectrum, was a very selective or picky eater. Picky is no longer PC. Selective eater, or there's actually a diagnosable term called ARFID, which stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. So it means, unlike, probably all of us had parents who said, if you don't eat your vegetables, you're not gonna get dessert. Someone with ARFID will say, I will just sit here then until I die, and they will actually mean it, right? So Fiona had very particular things that she liked and didn't like about food. And she was malnourished, and her nutritionist and pediatrician kept saying if we don't get her weight up, she's going to need tube feeding. She's going to have a port in her stomach and get her nutrients that way because she's just too stubborn to eat, and behaviorally we can't get it done. And so, and like a lot of folks with ARFID, it's sort of idiosyncratic, right? It's not everyone has the same likes and dislikes, it's to the child. So Fiona's preference was for crunchy things. So a typical lunch for her, and I had a photo of the lunchbox, is apples, those little veggie straws, I don't know if you know them, the carrot sticks, celery sticks, blueberries, which was a failed attempt at a different texture. And she would eat all those crunchy things. What's missing nutritionally from that? Protein. And if you think about protein sources, beans, tofu, cheese, meat, fish, peanut butter, eggs, what do they all have in common? They're all soft. So what do? How do you get a kid who doesn't eat anything besides crunchy to eat crunchy? So there was an intervention. A team, they're in Canada, had a team of the healthcare, a psychologist, and a dietitian and a pediatrician working together on a very complicated behavior modification intervention. If you try a new food, you get a reward, and if you get 3 rewards, you get a big reward, and they had all this stuff put in place, and it didn't work. And not only didn't it work, but Fiona started in their mind, or in their eyes, misbehaving. And one of the ways she misbehaved was she pretended to be the family dog, which I did as well as a kid, as a 4-year-old. So that's not so unusual. Kids like to pretend to be dogs. What was unusual is she was eating the dog's food, the kibble. And they said, well, this is not okay. You can't eat the dog's food. That's the dog's food. That's not human food. So then they realized they needed to keep the dog bowl out of Fiona's path. And so they would feed the dog at times when Fiona was asleep, and they thought that would resolve it. Well, Fiona was going into the cabinet and eating the dog food. She was doing this not to misbehave and pretend to be a dog. She was doing this because she had a protein deficiency, and the dog food had the protein she wanted in the texture crunch that she wanted. Now, we don't want Fiona to become a 30-year-old woman eating dog food. It was okay. It kept her alive, and it kept her off of tube feeding. And the nutritionist and the psychologist would say, well, let's look at the supermarket. Well, here's a high-protein cracker, but it's not really high enough protein. There's nothing in the supermarket that can meet her needs. So what did we do? We designed a food that could meet her needs. So we used a really interesting product for this. It's called defatted sunflower pomace. This is where it gets a little nerdy and a little bit higher tech. So sunflower oil is made from what? Sunflower seeds. In general, if you're looking for good nutrition, it's always in a seed or an egg, right? Because if you think about it, you plant, it's like magic, right? I'm a terrible gardener. But you plant that little seed, and somehow you get this giant plant, right? So all of the nutrients that can't be absorbed from the soil are in that tiny little seed, right? And so when you make sunflower oil, what you're doing is you're taking all the oil out of the seed, and what are you leaving behind? Protein, fiber, minerals, vitamins, right? So you have this crazy nutrient-dense flour that tastes a little bit nutty, but it's not an allergen, which is also not relevant for this customized nutrition, but it's good to know. So we were able to make her essentially kibble, right? But it was a biscuit, a cookie, that combined wheat flour with sunflower seed oil, 3 grams of protein, 4 grams of fiber per ounce. She would eat 6 to 8 ounces a day as a supplement to whatever her lunch was. And we gave her mom the recipe. So now Fiona's not on tube feeding. She's 9. She is verbal. Is that all because of the work of good cooking? No, but I'll take full credit, right, for keeping this girl thriving. And again, just from a simple cooking intervention. Okay, I have time for one more, and it's a fast one. And this is the ice cream. If you're comfortable sharing, you don't have to. Show of hands. One of the biggest challenges with older adults is malnutrition, especially after acute things like surgeries. Has anyone in this room been prescribed an oral nutrition supplement like Ensure or Boost to boost your calories or your nutrition in some way? Okay, a few of you. How many of you like that? No, no one. One. Oh, no, she's playing with her hair. No one. Okay, so pills. If you're prescribed a pill by your doctor, and you go home and you're supposed to take this pill, in general, there's about an 80% adherence rate. Most people take the pill they're supposed to take. Sometimes they forget, sometimes they can't afford the prescription, or they're fighting with the insurance company or something, but most of you will take that pill 80% of the time. Oral nutrition supplements, which are hugely important to maintaining health. The compliance rate if you're in the hospital and it comes on your meal tray is about 78%. And when you go home, it drops to about 37%. Why? Because people don't like it, right? So the last story that I'll end with is that we did ethnographic research, starting with my grandmother, who started this whole project because she was prescribed these, and she said they taste terrible and I won't drink them. And if I'm going to drink something like that, I want a real milkshake. I don't want a fake milkshake, right? So they don't like that they're not fresh. There's all this stuff about ultra-processed food. Oral nutrition supplements like Boost and Ensure are ultra-processed foods, right? And it's been a long time, probably since anyone had a milkshake with their dinner, right? It's just not culturally the way we eat. But one thing that's really culturally preferred among the folks we talked to was ice cream and dessert, right? And so they would have dinner, maybe an early dinner, then sit down around 8 o'clock, watch some TV or listen to a concert or read a book, and they loved to do that with a dessert. Cake, cookies, ice creams, does this resonate at all? It certainly resonates for me, right? So what if we could get the same nutrition in an Ensure or a Boost and put that into an ice cream format? Now, there are protein ice creams out there, but they're grainy and sandy, because when you add protein, you're essentially adding sand to the ice cream in terms of texture. So our innovation was we made a really rich sort of brownie inclusion, and that made the ice cream actually delicious. And it also made it not infantilizing, right? It wasn't like a little Dixie cup of grainy, smooth things. It was like a good ice cream with lots of stuff in it. So that's coming to market now, which I'm really excited about. So I'm going to conclude, and we're going to move to Q&A. So 3 concluding points. Number 1, it's really important to include research chefs on these teams to solve problems effectively, and I have more stories that I don't have time for. Number 2, it's really important to generate more research chefs. We train them at Drexel, undergrad and grad, so we're trying to sort of spread the news that there's a way to do this. And then third, we talk a lot about mindful eating, being very conscious and conscientious of what we're putting into our bodies, right? Not just, we've all had this experience, right? You're watching TV or you're on the phone and you have a chip, and next thing you know, you ate a bag of chips, and you said, how did that happen? I don't even remember eating that bag of chips, right? We do that with eating. How do we do this with cooking? What is the potentiality of these ingredients? Where do they come from? What can we do with them? And ultimately, I think understanding that can improve nutrition, reduce waste, and have better lives and a better food system. So I'm going to stop there and open it for questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good. All right.
Yeah, I'm a historian, and I also do prehistory. And one of the things that some of my students are surprised about is I say, 100,000 years ago, there's fire, and then subsequently after that, cooking evolves. And that really changed human life, because before that, people were eating things raw. Mm-hmm. And it's not just digestion and so on, it's that if you eat a raw potato, you only get X number of calories.
Yeah.
If you cook a potato, you get 2X. So it was really not just healthier and, more sanitary, but it reduced the amount of food you needed,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wonder if you could comment on how cooking does increase calories. There's a difference between raw carrots and cooked carrots and all the other vegetables.
No, that's a great question. Basically, you're talking about bioavailability, that cooking for some things increases the bioavailability of both the macronutrients that we get calories from, as well as the micronutrients. Some, it's a little complex. There's raw food advocates who say, well, if you cook your greens, for example, you're getting less vitamin C than if you eat them raw. That's true. But it's, in general, the cooking, as you're noting, has really been a game changer in terms of our absorption of nutrients. There's a lot of mythology, and it's great to have a prehistorian in the mix, because I'm sure you've seen people refer to things like the keto and caveman diets, which are basically saying, well, it's all protein, and it comes from the cartoons, right? The cavemen ate, prehistoric hominids ate, mammoths and game and stuff like that. And reality is, as you know, they ate like berries and leaves and grubs and, whatever they could kind of forage initially, until they started figuring out fire and agriculture and all this other stuff. So there's a lot, in general, there's a lot to unpack. But you're absolutely right. The cooking has really changed our whole trajectory. Right?
Well, and even the evolution there, is that in the old days, mostly guys went hunting because women had 2 or 3-year-olds, but they would go out and dig up roots, and so that was part of the whole process too. Nuts and roots and leaves and other kinds of things.
Yeah, and our whole society, people don't realize our whole society, how we divide labor, how we organize communities. I mean, food is at the heart of all of that, right? The whole gendered workforce, exactly came out of that distinction, tens of thousands of years ago. Yep.
It's a tough question.
Okay.
1980,
Okay.
obesity rate in America was 13%. Today, obesity rate in America is 42%. This was not by accident, but it was agricultural policy. It was Madison Avenue substituting processed foods and what was the snackification.
Yeah.
And it was also Madison Avenue saying, don't eat 3 meals a day. We want to hoodwink you into eating all day long.
Yep.
Now, that's resulted in an $800 billion in healthcare cost, low life expectancy, 1/3 diabetes. And the question is there room in this for getting involved in healthcare policy as in terms of agricultural policy, advertising policy?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the challenges, the core challenge of all of this is dieting is very anti-capitalist, right? It's all about more, as you're saying, Madison Avenue. Our whole economic foundation is on more, consumption. I think every dietitian would say, if you're trying to lose weight, the best way to lose weight is to buy less, eat less, move more, right? But that's very anti-capitalist. So what we do is we buy diet plans, we buy diet books and podcasts, right? Diet beverages, and now pharma, GLP-1s, and try to buy our way out of this crisis, which is very hard to do. And it's very hard to opt out of advertising and social media. And there's a lot of reasons, as you pointed out, including screen time, that are contributing to these changes. So yes, I think there are opportunities. I think it's starting to happen. There's some effort by the current administration tied to MAGA around teaching nutrition in med schools. That's very promising for this. There's some food as medicine funding now from insurance companies, where, for example, if you're a patient and you're homebound, your health insurance can pay for you to have meal delivery for medically tailored nutrition, medical nutrition therapy. So there are some, positive developments on that, but we're far from really having the kind of investment we need to say food is medicine and let's prioritize healthy eating. That's not coming soon.
Is your institution doing any studies or know anything about the lab-grown meat industry? Because it seems like that would be a big help for climate change.
Yeah, it's interesting. So lab-grown meat, I think, has a tremendous potential. There's still scalability issues, and there's still expensive inputs and a lot of energy required to grow it. But I agree. I think there were some good lessons learned from, and this actually is very consistent with the talk, Impossible and Beyond and all those meat analogs have largely failed. They're still on the market, but they're not anywhere near what they predicted the valuation to be or the consumption to be. And that's because it's really hard to change food habits. And people will try anything once, but it really has to deliver on quality, and the quality just wasn't there. So I do think lab-grown meats have a lot of potential because we're not giving up fish and steak and things like that, but we may be forced to, for certain commodities, to give them up because it's hard to find, wild seafood in the abundance it once was. So it's a promising solution. I'm cautious about it, but it's definitely happening.
I'm curious about your thoughts on food pyramids.
Yeah.
And the actual use, practicality of actually using them in cooking, because
Sure.
Nice concept, but what do you think about it?
Yeah, so food pyramids, I studied, I didn't talk much about my doctoral work, but I went to NYU for grad school and studied with Marion Nestle, among others. Marion is famous for writing a book called Food Politics, in which she basically explains how the food pyramid is shaped by corporate interests and lobbying. So, for example, eat less sugar became, don't quote me on this, I might have the exact wording wrong, but something like eat less sugar became enjoy sweets in moderation by the time it went through all the revisions and comment periods and so on. So I don't think it's really been intended to shape individual meals, but I think it is intended to shape overall lifestyle. And I think it's a good guide. I mean, I think there's a plate that I think is more useful than the pyramid that basically says half your plate should be veggies and fruits, and about a quarter can be grains, and about a quarter can be meat, and something like that, rather than the sort of traditional, it's called the SAD, the standard American diet, right, of that steak that's sort of overhanging the plate with a little broccoli floret on the side, right? We know that's not the way we should be eating. So I think certain things like that can be helpful.
I'm wondering if you could comment on the health benefits or research on vegetarianism. I've personally been vegetarian for 56 years.
And you're still here to tell the tale.
I'm still here,
Yeah.
and this is Body by Vegetables, but I've never been vegan. There's a red line at pizza.
Yeah.
I'm not giving up pizza.
Fair.
That's all
No,
there
I
is to it.
think it's a matter of what works for you individually. I think from a climate standpoint and from a nutrition standpoint, it's great to be vegetarian. I think with vegan, there's certain populations where you have to worry about protein and some nutrients like, vitamin A and so on. But for the most part, I'm a big advocate for eating plant-based or plant-forward. And then for those who are reluctant, just as you're reluctant to give up pizza, I think there are folks. I had a good friend who we called an ovo-lacto-bacco vegetarian because she would make an exception for her mother's bacon on Sunday mornings. If you could say, well, you can be predominantly, you could be flexitarian and incorporate what you feel you need to incorporate when you feel you need to incorporate it. But I think it's great.
LPN1 medicines. So we know the people who are on them lose a lot of weight.
Yeah.
We also know there's a lot of research connected with addiction. They're supposed to be able to help certain addictions.
Yeah.
Everything I've heard is great. What's not great about LPN1?
Yeah, GLP-1s are, what's not great is if you go off of them, it's really sets things awry. So it may be a lifelong commitment, which is scary to a lot of people. They're expensive, which is scary to a lot of people. And there are side effects, mostly GI, but also some like bone loss and other things that have come up that are being looked into. And there haven't been really longitudinal studies. So I think overall the good outweighs the bad. But like anything else, it's a personal decision and it's not for everyone and so on. But a lot of the studies are pretty promising about, reduced cardiovascular risk, reduced diabetes, weight loss, and so on.
Your story about the banana resonated with me.
Great.
I volunteer in a food pantry, and the amount of especially produce wastage is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Is there a source somewhere for information that would lead us to other answers like the frozen banana?
We've published a lot of this work, so it should come up if you Google like me and food waste, or if you share your info, I can give you some things, or feel free to reach out. We've done recipes for other commonly wasted foods from soup kitchen shelters and so on, so may have already done some of that, or if there's certain products that you want us to take a look at, we're happy to.
Thank you. I'll look it up.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you could comment. A number of years ago, when a friend was visiting from Israel to America for the first time, and we were out, and later a friend was visiting from Amsterdam for her first visit to America, and we were traveling about. And each of these individuals couldn't get over how large people were,
Yeah,
and how humongous portions are at our restaurants.
yeah,
And we're talking about the steak overflowing
yeah.
on a dinner plate, typically at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Could you comment on why is it in this country that our portions are so obscenely
Yeah.
large in general?
It's complicated. One, is always this like, is it the consumer demand, or is it the restaurants thinking it's the consumer demand? We've been doing a lot of work with the food industry on reducing waste in restaurants and hotels. And portion size and plate waste is a big area. So doing things like serving smaller portions, but letting people know that if they want more, they can ask for more, has been huge, because they typically don't ask for more, and they then have less plate waste. So that's been a really good innovation that some restaurants have tried. Rewarding people who take their own to-go containers, which I'm a big advocate of. When we do restaurant reviewing, we always have a bag of plastic takeout containers because we don't need any more to take our extra. But some people really feel that if the restaurant isn't providing not only dinner tonight, but lunch tomorrow and maybe lunch the next day in one, for their $20 entree or $30 entree, that it's not a good value. So I think some of it has to be consumers saying, this is fine, this is enough for me. But it's a big challenge for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Since 90% of wild capture fish stocks are being overfished or overfishing is occurring, could you talk about ways to minimize waste from seafood?
Yeah.
Shrimp and other, seafood products.
We talked about this a little bit already. So we've been doing a lot of work with frozen seafood. So most of the waste in the supermarket by value, by dollar amount, is at the seafood counter. And if you think about going to like a traditional supermarket, I'm not talking about like a fancy fish store, but just your local supermarket. Almost all the fish at the seafood counter was previously frozen and then defrosted, and then if it's not sold, it's typically discarded. Can't be repurposed because it's been under the lights and people have been handling it and so on. So one of the best things you could do is buy frozen seafood and cook, and it can be cooked from frozen, it can be kept frozen, and there's much less waste. If we did a big study with the World Wildlife Fund around frozen seafood some time ago, most Americans wish they ate more fish. And when you ask them why they don't eat more fish, they say it's too much planning and it's too perishable. So the frozen seafood really eliminates both of those things, right? You don't have something sitting in your fridge for a few days that you don't have time to use, and then you throw it out to be safe. So I think the frozen is great. Aquaculture is, I get the question a lot of like, what's better, wild caught or aquaculture? It's like anything else. It's complicated. It's like, well, depending on how the fishery is managed, wild may be better, but depending on the environmental practices of the fish farm, aquaculture may be better. There's no one answer. But I think some of the techniques, Paul Greenberg has an amazing book called For Fish, and he has a follow-up to that as well about sustainable seafood. So eating more fish that are lower on the food chain, things like sardines and anchovies, are not only really good for you in terms of the oils and omega-3s, but also better environmentally, less likely to have a problem with mercury and so on. And then finding sustainable fisheries, whether that's wild caught or aquaculture that you think are doing a good job, and using Monterey Bay Aquarium and other resources to figure out what's marketing hype and what's real. And then probably the most sustainable, if you eat seafood beyond fish, would be bivalves, which are actually carbon negative depending on how they're produced. Things like oysters and clams and mussels, actually, they filter the water, so they clean the water and create a reef and do a lot of good. And so it's one of the few foods that's actually good for the environment that we're cultivating it, as opposed to like a field of a crop, right, where you're spraying and using fossil fuels to harvest and so on. So, great. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate your questions and your interest.
Very interesting. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy your weekend. Thank you for coming.